When people think of mind control, they think about Jason Bourne type stuff, brainwashing, programming people, fancy machines and devices, crazy new advanced drugs and all of that. But all kinds of things fall into this category of mind control. It's all about changing behavior and making people less focused, making people less capable. This is what it's all about. And even this old school propaganda thing, which the Russians, for example, do, even that has been upgraded by databases and psychometrics and artificial intelligence. So back in the day, you could pretty much figure out what your target group was thinking and feeling, what they were hoping for, what they were afraid of. And then you could model the propaganda for this group and that target group and that target group. But now you have detailed databases on, most people in the West. So you know them individually. And the computer algorithm can create a psychological profile, right? So you can target small groups and even individuals. This is called micro-targeting. And these artificial intelligence algorithms, they can automate certain tasks and they can figure things out that humans even can't see, to understand the target population and to build the appropriate propaganda. So this is all mind control. Then, of course, ways to make people weaker and less focused and less concentrated. Chemicals, viruses, lack of nutrients, artificial stress factors, and psychological disorders among the population. Because, one narcissist, one real psychopath can make life miserable for, X number of people around them. Caffeine, alcohol, Adderall, all these substances, they all have an influence on how people function. And especially alcohol, for many, many thousands of years, alcohol has been around. And when you do drink on a regular basis, you may be able to do your tasks, get through your day and do what you already can do, things you have already mastered. But what about new things? What about, improving things and starting new projects? So the more alcohol you drink, the less you are capable of doing new things or having new thoughts. And this is why most entertainment and most political propaganda is very, very repetitive. It's always the same old, the same stories over and over again, just some of the names change and the characters change. So, propaganda and all sorts of mind control techniques, this is all targeted at the average citizen that has an IQ of about 100, and that citizen does not read many or any non-fiction books throughout the year. And usually when you target this person, it is, later in the day, it's the evening, and this person has already drank 2 beers at least. So propaganda is made for that person mostly in that state, tired, mentally tired, 2 beers, maybe even more. This is why propaganda is so silly, really. It's really, really primitive. It's always about calming people down, making them, creating irrational hope and giving them illusions of control. Groupthink, just focusing on icons, certain persons that are supposed to save us and all that sort of stuff. And so, this is propaganda for the masses. Now, of course, the empires, they hand select their own people, their officials, and the higher you want to get, the more you have to prove your loyalty and your value. So you gotta have a degree from a high-level university, and you must do some intelligence work, or you must do some high-level legal work, or some military work, and prove you're willing to risk your butt for the group. So this is how the successful circles do it, and so they're trying to be really, really smart, and they employ the best scientists to run these empires, but the average citizen has an IQ of about 100, and they don't read any nonfiction books of value, and this is where it matters. You can be the greatest police officer ever with an IQ of about 100. You can be an intelligence officer, field officer, with an IQ of about 115. That's perfectly fine. You can be the greatest field agent ever. but you have to learn, you have to be focused, and you have to really, be professional about it. But this is the difference, the winners, the successful circles, and the average citizens. They don't use their opportunities, and they're a target of mind control. In 1972, the intelligence agency DIA put out a report which is called Controlled Offensive Behavior. Now, this was a rundown of pretty much everything the Russians were doing in the field of mind control. So from radiation devices, esoteric experiments, and all that sort of stuff. This was a hodgepodge of things, same as in the West. And so this was quite a big concern in the American intelligence community, what the Russians were doing. So some of the stuff the Russians were doing was silly. Some of the stuff was, technological, radiation devices, new communication stuff for just making people, change people's behavior and change the way they think through certain types of electromagnetic radiation and other radiation. So people are taking this stuff very seriously. And so this is why, for example, DoD financed experiments, for example, about remote viewing in the United States. Stuff like General Bert Stubblebine did back in the old days. We've done a show on him. Personally got to know the guy. And he was a traditional all-American patriot military guy. But then he was drawn into this field of, weird research, and but they all took it seriously because the Russians were doing it, and they just wanted to be ahead of the game. So this was also a big influence on the Netflix hit show Stranger Things. So now you can read this report from 1972. It doesn't contain many details because it's very, very secret and classified, what the Americans knew about these Russian projects. But, you just have to remember that it was a big, big issue. And then, fairly recently, you had the Kernbach study. This was done by Sergei Kernbach at the Research Center of Advanced Robotics and Environmental Science in Stuttgart, Germany. So he was studying these Soviet mind control programs, or Russian mind control programs, between 1917 and 2003. He was drawing from all kinds of sources, Russian technical journals, recently declassified documents. He was trying to, make the best possible report on what the Russians were doing. So this was a hodgepodge of things. Some of the stuff the Russians did was, fairly high tech and useful. Some of the stuff was just parapsychology and esoteric, mumbo jumbo. And they were interested in a certain, certain rays, or a certain. They were interested in a certain radiation that the brain was supposedly emitting, and you could send and receive and stuff. So they were fascinated about that. And so this goes back to the 1870s. This is when spiritualism was all the rage in Europe, and everybody was interested in that stuff. And you had modern scientists, and they were having breakthroughs all over the place. And at the same time, science, just like with the Royal Society in Britain, at the same time, science was still interested in, the occult and that sort of stuff. And so the Russians, they created a commission headed by Professor Mendeleev to figure out if this spiritualism is actually real, a real phenomenon. Now, Mendeleev was a chemist, and he created he created many new things, and he was also advising the war ministry. So he was a serious guy. He was cutting edge, and so that's why they asked him to lead the commission to figure out, is the spiritualism stuff real? Because you want a scientist, but you also want somebody who's cutting edge and who's thinking outside the box. So he got himself some other scientists, and they looked at this stuff, and they said, no, it's not true. That doesn't work. Now, Mendeleev he was connected to these German scientists, Justus von Liebig, Emil Lenz, very famous guys. And behind those guys, you had these German universities. And behind the universities, you had these aristocratic networks, very high-powered, very sophisticated, and full of intelligence activity. So nobody wanted to miss anything important. They always wanted to be cutting edge. So the commission... So the commission was very interesting back then, that the Russians put together. Some of these scientists, they actually believe in spiritualism, so they try to be as unbiased as possible. But the result was, no, it doesn't really work. And there's a lot of deception going on among these spiritualists and occultists. And there was correspondence between Russian and German scientists. Even, they had something to do with Helena Blavatsky, with her theosophy group and all that. And Blavatsky was actually from a German family called the Hahn family, which was aristocracy, very old family from Mecklenburg, which is, basically between, or very close to Russia and very close to Britain. And, the element of fraudulent activity, there was a point to it. It was just to create a certain profile for somebody like Blavatsky. So some people understood that she was faking things. Sometimes they used little machines in these seances, and there were some other tricks, you can pull, some fakery. But this was accepted by some people as a necessary evil, because if you want to have somebody like Blavatsky travel the world and talk to interesting people who may have something, found something real, you need to build up the profile of Blavatsky. And, if trickery, does what you want it to do, then, trickery it is. And so that's what they used. And so lots of espionage going on, of course. The conclusion of the commission in 1876 said spiritualistic phenomena occur on the unconscious movements or conscious deception, and spiritualistic doctrine is superstition. And that was basically it for the government. They were no longer really that interested in it. Then came the communists, and in 1924, the Commissar of Education, Lunar Charsky, formed the Russian Committee for Psychical Research at the International Committee on the Psychical Research. So they had an institute in Leningrad and they had one in Moscow, and they independently were supposed to, figure out if spiritualism was real and if you had any other ideas about mind control. So they were interested in telepathy, remote viewing stuff, so you can kind of see or hear what's going on somewhere else. Just like in the, Netflix show Stranger Things, or the experiments of General Bert Stubblebine. They were interested in transferring visual images, and were interested in remotely influencing a percipient. This was what they were interested in. Now, of course, for intelligence work, this would have been the holy grail, right? You can just have your agent be somewhere, accessing something, and then just mentally transfer these images, and, you wouldn't have to... You don't need a dead drop. You don't need a brush pass. You don't need a secret radio communications. None of that. You would just send the information with your mind. This would have been a holy grail for intelligence. Of course. So the OGPU, or NKVD, which is basically like the KGB, was what it was called later, they were interested in this. Of course, they had this neuroenergetic laboratory at a special department of the OGPU. And so, due to the fact that the documents are so classified, we can only guess what was happening in this laboratory. And, obviously, the Soviets had these expeditions. They sent people all around the world to these interesting sites, trying to find something new or find interesting people that may have special abilities. You wanted to find people with special abilities to train your own people in these methods. All these Soviet programs collapsed in 1937, then came the war, Second World War, and the Soviets actually shot some of these researchers They killed some of these people, they imprisoned some of these people, they were no longer interested in what they were doing, but they kept some of the programs and some of the information, especially about microwave radiation or other types of radiation. So then, in the 50s and 60s, Cold War, Soviets, they jump-started their program and they were reviewing the stuff they've done before. They also tried to look at the material which they took from Germany, especially Germany's Ahnenelbe program. Now, the Ahnenelbe program by the Germans was mostly about myth-making. They were supposed to send people around the world and find fake evidence that Aryans had once dominated the world, and anything great was always Nordic. So even the Roman Empire, anything good about the Roman Empire was Nordic to them, and anything bad, anything destructive, according to them, was Oriental. Now this is also where the anti-Semitism then is derives from. So they thought, well, Roman Empire was great, but then these Orientals, they destroyed it, and so that was kind of what the Ahnenelbe was supposed to do, just create this super big mythology. When the National Socialists took over, they closed down pretty much all of these right-wing organizations that were mythical and occult. So anything was illegal except some very, very powerful, very selected organizations, and they were supposed to make these expeditions. In 1935, Himmler contacted a Finnish nobleman and author, Yrjö von Grönhagen. And Grönhagen was born in St. Petersburg. His father served in the Russian army under the tsars. So this is kind of the stuff that they did. And yeah, that sort of stuff. And you had people involved like Wolfram Sievers, who is still hailed today by right-wing circles. The Russian far-right political philosopher Alexander Dugin adopted in the 1980s an alter ego with the name of Hans Sievers, a reference to Wolfram Sievers. The Soviet research was split into a few areas. You had the classic parapsychological experiments with a variety of phenomena exhibited by physics. That stuff was continued. Second, the program on the influence of EM radiation on biological objects received essential attention. So they were experimenting with psychotronic weapons. Smaller weapons, larger weapons. They wanted to make all kinds of stuff. So what they had in mind was a weapon which you could fire at an enemy city. And so everybody in the city would then fall asleep or be confused, unable to fight. Now, it's not exactly clear how successful that was, but this is sort of the stuff they were thinking about. And they also had some experiments with bunny rabbits. They had sort of they modified these rabbits in their brains. So in the hopes they could stimulate, one rabbit to transmit to the other rabbit who was 7 kilometers or miles away. And the stimulus could be triggered at will, but they hoped for a special secret type of frequency that the rabbits could then transmit on. And if you could master that other, special frequency, you could use it for military and intelligence purposes. Now, of course, nowadays you have quantum mechanics and, quantum communications and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, this was, back in the old day. They were experimenting. A lot. So, in the 1990s, the Russians did another review of their own research, and they were not that happy. They basically said that, quite a quite a bit of that program was garbage, but there was still some interesting stuff, and they want to continue on that. There's another interesting study. It's Vladimir Velminsky's Homo Sovieticus, Brainwaves, Mind Control, and Telepathic Destiny, published in German, for example, in 2013. He's a historian, and he wanted to outline a new picture of the thinking that shaped the Soviet age. Now, of course, Soviet thinking was about really running people as much as possible, you know, just not just like in the medieval times, or when you know, the aristocracy had the physical power, and the church, they wanted to, you know, run how people thought. This was the next generation. The Soviets wanted to create a new kind of person. And today we see kind of the contrast in the world between old school regimes and new type of systems. Now, communist China, for example, today still has that old outline, you know, where you have one ideology, which is communism, and you have to follow it unless you want to get into serious trouble. Now, in the West, you have choices. You know, you can pick from a few pre-selected choices. You know, they're all under control, you know, whether you're in the political middle, left, right, libertarian, conspiracy, mythology. You can pick from one of those categories, but they're all under control. It's the illusion of choice, and you can argue among your own group, you know, about certain things, because these groups split up into subgroups. You can also, of course, complain about things and just complain about all these other groups. But in the end, you know, the whole system is under control. Now, the Western system is much smaller than the traditional system. And you could sort of see how these mind control methods, how they improved over the last, let's say, 10, 20 years. Now, with Russia, they had a strategy in the 1990s of you know, becoming very, very quiet on the international stage. So almost during the entire 1990s, the Russians did not want many people in the world to pay attention. You know, they were reshaping their empire. They got help from the West. And this, you know, quite some, you know, dangerous changes there in Russia, but they did not want people to take much notice. You know, this was in the 90s. So you had a phase of pretty much almost 10 years where the world wasn't paying attention. So this is a decade where people just stopped caring in the West. They didn't read any books. They forgot about things. So the West was not prepared for what came next in the 2000s, you know, with the Putin era. And so from, let's say, 2000 until 2008, which was the era of of Bush in the United States, in that time frame, the Russian strategy was to mostly criticize America. Not promote Russia yet, just criticize America. This started right after 9/11, and of course then with the Afghan war and the Iraq war and, you know, the Patriot Act and so on and so forth. So Russia was inserting itself more and more in the West, you know, creating or just enhancing, you know, people's fears and enhancing people's concerns and people's anger. So you saw an infiltration of conspiracy media, you know, more and more Russian people or Russian affiliated people popped up and, you know, talked about 9/11 and the Patriot Act and all that. So it was always criticizing the American government, not really promoting the Russian government. This was just, you know, this was just implicit. And then the next change came in 2008. You know, Obama became president, and that's when the Russians actually started to advertise for the Putin regime. You know, piece by piece, saying it's not so bad, you know, they do this good and that good, and then just increasing that stuff until it basically said the Russians do it best, they should run the world and Putin will save everybody, especially conservatives in the West. He is the big hope. He's got the spirit of 1776 and so on and so forth. So this was from 2008 onwards. Now, if you look at a conspiracy best-selling book from the 1990s, there's nothing in it about Russia. Nobody cared. So you have like a new generation of conspiracy buffs that knew nothing about Russia, or the newer Russia, and they've forgotten all about the Cold War, and they didn't really read up on the Cold War. And then these conspiracy buffs and many, many others, they were then confronted by the new level of Russian propaganda starting in 2008. So it shows you how far mind control has progressed when the Russian system could promote somebody like Vladimir Putin, you know, who is just a muppet of the old KGB leadership. And, you know, this was just a, this was just a continuation of the regime, you know, the communist empire, which was really an old school empire in many ways. And so, yeah, that worked, but it took time, right? So it needed years and years and years of buildup to sell Putin to a Western audience. And also in the West, it took many years to build up Obama and to groom him and to, you know, get him into the first office and then, you know, enhance his portfolio and all that, and then have this presidential campaign of hope and change. So that took a while, okay? And then with the Trump era, you already saw the new level of technology, the new mind control technology, psychometrics and the databases and the artificial intelligence algorithms. And then it was possible to promote a guy like Trump who had no credibility among conservatives, who wasn't a politician even, who always cared about women and money and his own personal, promotion, his own PR. It took only months to turn that guy with no credibility, to turn that guy into the political savior for the American right wing. Of course, it needed the CNP, the Council for National Policy, to sign off on him. And people in the CNP, some people were worried that this was the wrong choice. It could create all kinds of problems, lasting problems for conservative, especially for, among women voters and younger voters. But somebody at the top decided, no, it's going to be Trump. And it took only a few months and these algorithms to make people believe he's going to save America. And he has a special team behind him that's going to save America and arrest the left wing and all that stuff. It only took a few months. He had no prior credibility. And this is how advanced technology really is. And so we'll see what happens in the next few years. If there's going to be another Trump admin, which will not change anything significantly. The previous Trump admin was basically a Bush admin. You saw the same people running the administration that you would have expected in a Jeb Bush administration. Very, very baseline Republican. And also, with the Democrats, they sold Joe Biden, who is basically the Muppet of the mighty DuPont family. Very, very powerful family, running Delaware like a medieval fiefdom, and almost like an aristocratic family would do things. But they were able to sell that guy with modern technology, and and now also you can use this technology to sell a war, like for example the war in Ukraine. Now the Russians have been trying very hard to sell this as a liberation of Ukraine and to sell this as defending against NATO, at the same time the West is, or especially the NATO leadership, they're trying their best to use technology to sell the idea of NATO. They just did their thing. Ukraine seemed so weak. Ukraine had what the Russians wanted, the people and the industry. So the Russians came and tried to grab it, and then NATO said, oh my God, now we have to react. Now this basically proves why we need NATO. And then this whole thing with the Chinese goes up in flames. And of course, NATO has been building up China economically for a long time. And there's all sorts of shenanigans there. So, yeah, I mean, it makes the most sense for the superpowers to have a secret deal or to create a secret understanding, to settle and just run the world, because what's the point of them destroying each other? So then they would be destroyed and other empires would then take over. Makes no sense for them. So they could sell all kinds of stuff with this modern technology. And they really, these large powers, they really think you're stupid, because they think on average you have an IQ of 100. You don't read any proper books, non-fiction books, and yeah, you're tired in the evening and you drink alcohol in the evening. So this is how they treat you. And they try to use every mean available to keep you that way. So you don't actually play your cards right. This is how the game is played. So mind control is a very broad field, and there are ways to protect yourself. Read proper books, listen to proper programs, and stay healthy. Figure out how these empires actually work, and then you can find other people, and you can actually have good communication, because this is also one of the main aspects of mind control. When they destroy communication, everybody wants to be in activist mode, and they're yelling at each other in social media. Nobody wants to listen, and nobody is putting themselves into the other person's position, and breakdown of communication may seem like a success when you can just hate on the opposition, but if everybody starts to communicate that way, you can't get anything done. It's going to be a complete and total deadlock. Without communication, this is imagine if the different elements of your car don't really communicate with each other, or the different pieces and parts of your computer, if they don't really communicate with each other, nothing works. All right, subscribe to this channel if you like this sort of content, and like this video and comment on this, and share our content. You can also find my ebook in the description with the link. It's about old intelligence networks and how big they are and what influence they have today.